My cousin accidentally contacted me while venting about me to the family. I overheard her say, "He's just a pathetic ATM who thinks money makes him worth something." I remained silent, then terminated every payment I'd been making. A week later, they were flooding my phone yelling, I, 32M, never expected that a mistaken phone call would change everything between me and my family. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone rang, and I saw my cousin's name on the screen. I answered expecting the usual, another request for money or help with some crisis. Instead, I got something completely different. She hadn't meant to call me. The phone was in her bag, and somehow I'd been dialed by accident. What I heard next made my stomach drop and my hands shake with anger. She was talking to someone, probably my aunt from the sounds of it, and they were discussing me. Not in a good way. My cousin's voice was clear as she complained about how I always acted like I was better than everyone else just because I had money. She called me a pathetic ATM who thought money made me worth something. She laughed as she told whoever was listening that the family only tolerated me because I was useful. I sat there in my car, phone pressed to my ear, listening to them tear me apart. They talked about how I was desperate for acceptance and would do anything to buy their love. My cousin mentioned how easy it was to manipulate me into paying for things by making me feel guilty or acting like they really needed my help. The conversation continued for almost 20 minutes. I heard multiple family members chime in with their own observations about my pathetic need to be needed. They discussed my recent payments, my uncle's mortgage when he was behind, my cousin's medical bills, my aunt's car repairs, even my younger cousin's college tuition. Everything I thought I was doing out of love and family loyalty was being mocked and dismissed. They knew I could afford it, and they saw me as nothing more than a walking bank account with emotional issues. My cousin even mentioned how she could probably get me to pay for her upcoming wedding if she played her cards right and made me feel important enough. I hung up without saying a word. My hands were trembling as I sat there processing what I'd just heard. 20 years of helping family, of believing I was building strong relationships and being a good person, and this was how they really saw me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying their words, analyzing every interaction I'd had with them over the past few years. The patterns became clear once I knew what to look for. The way they only called when they needed something. How they'd lay on the guilt thick when I hesitated. The fake gratitude that never seemed genuine. I spent the next day making a list of every payment I was currently making for family members. The numbers were staggering. Between regular monthly payments and emergency help, I was spending over $4,000 a month on various family members. My uncle's mortgage payment was $800 monthly. My cousin's medical payment plan was $300. My aunt's car payment was $450. The list went on. By Thursday, I'd made my decision. If I was just a pathetic ATM to them, then it was time to stop dispensing cash. I started with my uncle's mortgage. I called the bank and explained that I would no longer be making payments on his behalf. They were professional about it and confirmed that future payments would need to come from him directly. Next was my cousin's medical bills. I contacted the hospital's billing department and removed my automatic payment authorization. One by one, I systematically removed myself from every financial obligation I'd taken on for my family. Car payments, insurance premiums, utility bills, credit card payments, everything. I even canceled the college tuition payments I'd been making for my younger cousin, though that one hurt because she wasn't involved in the conversation I'd overheard. The process took 3 days to complete. I had to make dozens of phone calls, fill out paperwork, and navigate various customer service departments. Some places required written notice, others just needed verbal confirmation. By Sunday, I was completely free of all financial entanglements with my family. I felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The first sign of trouble came the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the phone call that changed everything. My uncle called me 3 times in a row before I answered. He was panicked because his mortgage payment had been rejected and the bank was saying they had no authorization to accept payments from my account anymore. I told him calmly that I was no longer making his mortgage payments and that he'd need to handle it himself going forward. The confusion in his voice was almost comical. He kept asking why, what had happened, if there was some kind of mistake with the bank. I simply repeated that I wouldn't be making any more payments and hung up. Within an hour, my phone was ringing constantly. My aunt called because her car payment had bounced. My cousin called about her medical bills. Even my younger cousin called crying about her tuition payment being declined. Each time, I gave them the same calm explanation. I was no longer making payments on their behalf, and they needed to handle their own financial responsibilities. By Wednesday, the calls had turned angry. My cousin, the same one who'd called me a pathetic ATM, was screaming at me about how I was being selfish and cruel. She demanded to know what was wrong with me and why I was suddenly acting like this. I remained silent during her tirade, which seemed to make her even angrier. My uncle tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment Thursday evening, looking haggard and desperate. He explained how he was going to lose his house if he couldn't make the payment, how his credit was already damaged from previous late payments, and how his family would be homeless. He begged me to reconsider, promising he'd pay me back somehow. I listened to his entire speech without interruption. When he finished, I asked him if he thought I was a pathetic ATM who only used money to try to make myself worth something. The color drained from his face, and I could see the recognition in his eyes. He stammered some excuse about not knowing what I meant, but we both knew he'd been part of that conversation. Friday brought a family intervention of sorts. My aunt, uncle, and both cousins showed up together. They'd clearly coordinated their approach, probably hoping that group pressure would change my mind. They took turns explaining their various hardships and how much my help had meant to them. They talked about family loyalty and how family members were supposed to help each other. I let them speak without interruption, watching their faces as they tried different tactics. Guilt, anger, bargaining, even threats about cutting me off from the family entirely. When they finally ran out of steam, I asked them a simple question. I wanted to know if they thought family members should talk about each other the way they'd been talking about me. The room went silent. My cousin tried to deny knowing what I meant, but her face was red with embarrassment. My aunt looked confused until my uncle shot her a warning look. It was clear they all knew exactly what I was referring to. I explained that I'd overheard their conversation the previous week. I told them I knew they saw me as nothing more than a source of money, someone desperate enough to buy their affection. I repeated some of the specific things they'd said, watching their faces change as they realized how much I'd heard. The accusations and denials came quickly. My cousin claimed she'd been joking or that I'd misunderstood. My uncle insisted they were grateful for my help and that I was taking things the wrong way. My aunt tried to minimize what they'd said, suggesting that families sometimes vent frustrations but don't really mean them. I remained calm throughout their explanations. When they finished, I told them that their actions over the past week had proven everything I'd overheard was true. Not one of them had called to check on me or see how I was doing. Every single contact had been about money and payments. They'd only shown concern for our relationship when their financial support disappeared. My younger cousin started crying, explaining that she hadn't been part of whatever conversation I'd overheard and didn't understand why her tuition payments had stopped. This was the hardest part because she was genuinely innocent in all of this. I explained that while I didn't hold her responsible for what the others had said, I was no longer comfortable mixing family relationships with financial support. The meeting ended badly. My older cousin accused me of being vindictive and cruel. She said I was proving their point about thinking I was better than everyone else. My uncle warned me that I'd regret this decision when I realized how isolated I'd become. My aunt tried one last guilt trip about destroying the family over hurt feelings. I watched them leave, noting how none of them had apologized or acknowledged that what they'd said about me was hurtful and wrong. Their focus remained entirely on the financial impact of my decision. Update 1. The weekend brought a new wave of attempts to change my mind. My mother called, clearly having been briefed by the others about the situation. She tried to mediate, suggesting that maybe there had been misunderstandings on both sides. She urged me to be the bigger person and restore the payments while everyone worked through their issues. I explained to my mother exactly what I'd overheard and how it had made me feel. She was quiet for a long time before admitting that she'd heard similar comments from family members over the years, but had hoped I hadn't noticed. She said she understood why I was hurt, but worried about the practical consequences for everyone involved. Monday brought news that my uncle was desperately trying to refinance his house to afford the payments. My cousin had set up a payment plan with the hospital that would take years to complete. My aunt was looking into selling her car and finding alternative transportation. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I also felt no obligation to rescue them. They'd created their financial dependencies on me through manipulation and false pretenses. Now they were dealing with the reality of their actual financial situations. My younger cousin approached me differently than the others. She called and acknowledged that she didn't fully understand what had happened between me and the rest of the family, but she wanted to apologize if she'd ever made me feel used or unappreciated. She said she was working on getting student loans to replace the tuition help and didn't expect me to continue supporting her education. Her maturity and genuine remorse made me reconsider her situation. I told her I'd think about whether there was a way to help with her education that didn't recreate the unhealthy dynamic I'd had with the others. Update 2. 3 weeks after cutting off the payments, the family drama reached a crescendo. My cousin had apparently been telling extended family members her version of events, painting me as a cruel and vindictive person who'd abandoned the family during their time of need. I started receiving calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all trying to convince me to reconsider my decision. Some were sympathetic to my position once they heard the full story. Others seemed to think I was overreacting to casual comments that weren't meant to be hurtful. The most surprising call came from my grandmother, who'd apparently heard about the situation through the family gossip network. She told me she was proud of me for standing up for myself and that she'd been watching the family take advantage of my generosity for years. She said she tried to warn me subtly, but knew I needed to figure it out for myself. My uncle ended up losing his house. He and his family moved in with my aunt temporarily while looking for a rental they could afford. My cousin's wedding plans were significantly scaled back due to her medical payment obligations. The family dynamics had shifted dramatically, and I found myself genuinely excluded from most family gatherings and communications. Surprisingly, the isolation didn't bother me as much as I'd expected. I realized that many of my family relationships had been transactional rather than genuine. Without the constant requests for money and the guilt about not helping enough, I felt more peaceful and less anxious. I did decide to help my younger cousin with her final year of college, but I structured it differently. Instead of paying her tuition directly, I set up a small scholarship through her school that she could apply for along with other students. This way, the help wasn't personal or creating a sense of obligation between us. Update 3. 6 months later, I received an unexpected apology. My cousin who'd made the original comments reached out through email rather than calling. She acknowledged that what she'd said was cruel and unfair. She explained that she'd been going through financial stress and had taken out her frustrations on me in a way that was completely inappropriate. She didn't ask for money or try to restore our previous arrangement. Instead, she apologized for taking advantage of my generosity and for not appreciating what I'd done for the family over the years. She said she understood why I'd cut off support and didn't blame me for my decision. The apology felt genuine, though it came only after months of struggling with the consequences of my absence from their financial situations. I appreciated her reaching out, but I also recognized that the timing suggested it might have been motivated by continued financial difficulties rather than pure remorse. I responded politely, thanking her for the apology and explaining that I bore no personal grudges against anyone. I told her I hoped she'd find stability in her financial situation and that our family relationships could eventually be rebuilt on healthier foundations. My uncle never apologized directly, but he did stop making hostile comments about my decision when we encountered each other at family events. My aunt seemed to understand my position better after some time had passed, though she never explicitly acknowledged her role in the situation. The family gatherings I did attend were awkward initially, but gradually became more comfortable as everyone adjusted to the new dynamic. Conversations were less strained when they weren't underlaid with unspoken expectations about financial help. I learned to set clear boundaries about money and family. When relatives mentioned financial difficulties, I expressed sympathy but didn't offer solutions. When they asked directly for help, I politely declined and suggested alternative resources they could explore. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the difference between helping someone and enabling them, between generosity and manipulation, and between family loyalty and being taken advantage of. I realized that true family relationships shouldn't require constant financial transactions to maintain. Looking back, that accidental phone call was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to confront the reality of relationships I'd been idealizing and gave me the courage to prioritize my own financial and emotional well-being. I still help family members occasionally, but now it's on my terms and in ways that don't create ongoing dependencies or obligations. The relationships that have survived this transition are stronger and more genuine than what existed before. The ones that didn't survive were probably not worth maintaining anyway. My bank account is certainly healthier, but more importantly, my relationships are more honest and my boundaries are more respected. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to stop enabling their poor decisions and force them to take responsibility for their own lives.